On today's episode, we're asking if John Cena can ever give the attitude adjustment to The Rock at the box office. Is it truly a bad time for indie games? A WrestleMania preview? And why are we mad at Ready Player One? All this and more as we reach our next stop, the PCC Multiverse. Welcome back once again to another episode of the PCC Multiverse. My name is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. We truly want to thank you for tuning in and listening in on today's program. But it wouldn't be a PCC Multiverse without my good friend. He is the man, the myth, the legend behind Humanican Media. You got to check out all the great stuff that's going on with their program at humanicamedia.com. It's Josh Peterson. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, just getting ready to go on a trip here, man. You caught me at the perfect time on my way out. So I'm excited to do this.
And say, I will see you guys later. Something like that?
Yeah, that's what I was going for. I was going to do Hasta La Vista because nobody's ever done that before. That's completely original. I just trademarked it.
Maybe not. But anyways, well, speaking of which, our best to Arnold Schwarzenegger, as he's the second celebrity we've had to say get well and best wishes to in the past couple of weeks, with Kevin Smith being the other. I know he just got out of, I believe, open heart surgery. So all the best to Mr. Schwarzenegger on that, and I hope he gets well real soon. But we definitely have a great show for you indeed. We have Rob McCallum is back in the middle of the cosmic crossfire. He's coming up in a few minutes. We're going to be going back and forth on a lot of pop culture subjects. Also as well, on a lot of pop culture talk. Also as well, we've got our good friend Mike Crockett from the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. He's going to preview this weekend's WrestleMania. We're going to be talking about Daniel Bryan's return to the ring. Is The Undertaker going to be there against John Cena, and a whole lot more? He's going to preview that as well. Plus, we're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about a lot of other great pop culture things as well. But first, Josh, John Cena, speaking of which, is not only trying to be at WrestleMania facing off against The Undertaker, but he's also going to be appearing in the movie. Well, I can't say the first thing that they have insignia for, but Blockers is going to be the running title of it, because you really don't want to say the first part of it unless you're doing something NSFW. But it is coming out this weekend, as he's one of three parents with Leslie Mann, and one of three parents actually going ahead and trying to prevent their kids from really just doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing on prom night or whatnot. Although when we were kids, we were probably thinking the other way around. But be that as it may, Josh, I want to ask you, John Cena in the past few years has made a concerted effort to try and transition himself into more of a general box office movie star. This Blockers movie, and also the movie he's also working on that's coming up later down the road, Duke Nukem, are decidedly different from being family-friendly fare. So I ask you, Josh, is his turn going into more hardcore, a little bit more adult subjects? Is that something that you see as a good thing for him to do? Or do you see it as maybe a possible detour from him trying to either get at the level or surpass fellow in-ring competitor, former in-ring competitor, I should say, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
No, I mean, he already has an issue with people not taking him seriously, and I don't think that going after more hardcore films is going to really destroy his reputation, especially since his reputation isn't really much of a reputation at this point. Like he's already been in some adult themed films. Like what was the one with Bill Hader and
Amy Schumer and all that? Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. And he did show us a comedic side I think that's one of the first roles that actually showed some promise and some breakout material there as far as for his standard on what he could do. Daddy's Home 2, obviously he had a role there as well, but I don't know when it comes to the decisions that he's making. Duke Nukem, I got to question that one because I do not see him as the Duke Nukem per se, from my standpoint, as someone who has played Duke Nukem over the years and know exactly what kind of individual that he is as far as within the video game sense and what kind of mouth he has and what kind of his attitude is, as opposed to John Cena, who's courted many times in his career in the WWE more of a family-friendly type atmosphere.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. Like, he's smart in the fact that, he is going for movies like Duke Nukem because he's not, I guess, pigeonholing himself into a certain type of role. Whereas The Rock kind of had a rocky transition into other types of films after doing stuff like, uh, Mummy Returns, Scorpion King, The Rundown. Like, he was the guy. He was the action film guy. He's like Jason Statham. But John Cena is he's just doing everything, anything and everything. So he's not just targeting one section of fans, but he's targeting a lot of fans. And I don't, you can be in a hardcore movie and not, and still be considered a guy who can play in a family movie. I mean, we've seen that,
Well,
tons.
he's still been in something like voicing the role of Ferdinand the Bull in the movie Ferdinand that came out in late 2017.
Right. So he can go from being in Duke Nukem to um being in a kids movie or whatever. But look at Vin Diesel too. Like, he tried it, and after being in movies like Pitch Black and Boiler Room and stuff like that, and then he went into The Pacifier, which was a weird thing. But like, John Cena is, I don't know, he just seems like a cool guy. He seems like somebody that you could sit down, have a beer with, your families could go out to dinner together, and despite whatever he's in, it's still like he's not getting stuck in that type of genre. Because even with Duke Nukem, it's kind of, what I'm imagining it being is kind of like Deadpool, because even the games were kind of like that, where it was, had the funny, dirty comedy type stuff. But I think he's doing pretty well for himself. He's a lot of people have tried to venture outside of wrestling and just failed miserably, but he's actually doing okay at it.
And you talk about his diversity as far as going back and forth from more adult fare to more family friendly affair. I mean, he just hosted the Nickelodeon Awards, the Nickelodeon's Kids Awards recently. So that shows you that entities are still out there that are willing to accept him still in a family friendly basis, but yet he can venture out into more risque fare such as blockers and the subject matter that it deals with.
Right. And just the fact that, like, he is willing to do it, like he's willing to take that chance, willing to risk that the comfort of a stereotypical career is that's big for him too, because he's John Cena. Kids look up to him. So good for him for not pigeonholing himself into something. And Blockers looks funny, and like he's literally, like, he's not a great actor, but he's the type of actor who, you look at him and you think to yourself, that guy could probably play a lot of different roles. So why not see what he can do?
Well, this leads me into two final questions on John Cena that I'll touch on right now. And then obviously when Mike Crockett and I come back on later in the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about his proposed match against The Undertaker at WrestleMania this weekend. With Blockers, it is something that may or may not hit at the box office. It probably needs to get around $25 to $30 million for a weekend that might surpass what Ready Player One will do in a second weekend. Do you think that Blockers, with possibly that type of fare that people may know of when it comes to like Judd Apatow, Seth Rogen, because Seth Rogen is actually a producer of this movie. Do you think that this movie Blockers will actually get and will actually see a successful weekend at the box office, and you think it might actually nose itself ahead of Ready Player One?
No, I don't think it's going to do that good, but it's going to be, I don't want to put it down right away, but
You kind of did.
um, because Ready Player One, it's its second weekend, and you look at the numbers. What was the total from last weekend?
About 53, which means if it does half that, you're talking about 27. Or even if it's like a slide, even similar to what Pacific Rim Uprising had, you're still talking about a $22 to $25 million weekend. I think it'll hold a little bit stronger than Pacific Rim Uprising because that really tanked in its second weekend. So I see around a $25 million weekend at the box office for Ready Player One. So blockers may surprise, in my opinion, and might actually get above 20 million and could possibly sneak out the weekend, but it would have to be above $25 million, in my opinion, at domestically here at the box office this weekend in order to be number one.
Right. Yeah. Well, you see, it's like, I don't know, with movies like that, they hit or miss. So like I guess it's all going to depend on the reviews or how interested, because they haven't exactly done a great job of marketing blockers, because I've seen very few posters, very few billboards on. The only reason like I'm up to knowledgeable on it is because I've heard people talk about it on different podcasts, and I've seen the trailer maybe like twice. So that's
And
how.
it's got the rooster, and obviously there's another connotation to that, but we won't go into that.
Right. And it's the same, it's like how when obviously the Hangover had a lot, but like it's one of those movies where like kids are like, oh, this is the forbidden fruit. We got to go see this. And then we're going to quote it for the next 20 years. So it's got, it's got that working for it. But I just don't see a lot of people who are hyped about it are not people, or that I know that are hyped, are not people who are hyped enough to go see it in theaters. So, we'll just have to wait and see. But as for Ready Player One, like at least they have on their side, like you're not seeing a lot of negative reviews, but instead you're seeing explanations for all the Easter eggs, and that's creating more curiosity. So I think that maybe they're going to do a little better than what we're predicting, but we won't know until the numbers come in.
Or differences within the book as versus the film. That's the only thing I'm really seeing as far as that's concerned. They're not saying that it's bad, they're just saying it is a difference from the book from the film.
Yeah, exactly. And last week I called it. I said they're going to hire someone to adapt Armada, and then I was reading a news article today saying that they did. So go me.
There you go. That was a good call, and something obviously you could tell with the success of Ready Player One. Had it tanked, that same person probably wouldn't be getting a job today. As far as that would be, as far as that would go. But could blockers fall into the same line as what many years ago we're talking about Porky's and how that found success as far as that kind of market with the teenage boys, with the early adults, as far as looking at that, or the movies that have come out in a more modern venture, such as The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which did hit number one. I think number one was like 2 or 3 weeks in a row at the time it came out, Knocked Up. And like you said, the Hangover movies, which are definitely R-rated fare as far as what they were discussing in content-wise, but they still found a great niche as far, and even so far as go as what, Sausage Party and Deadpool within that realm as well. So we'll see how well Blockers does as an R-rated comedy when it comes out this weekend at the box office. It could be very close. I will just say I'm going to give it a little bit stronger chance and say it's going to exceed expectations. Those movies are kind of like review proof that either people are just going to go see them or not that first weekend. I don't think, no matter how bad the reviews get, it's really going to impact that type of film as much as some others, as others of it's not going to affect that type of movie as much as maybe say Ready Player One or a sci-fi film or a drama that if it was rated if it was rated lower as far on the end of the Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic scale. So definitely looking forward to that this weekend with the challenge that Blockers is going to make to Ready Player One. But while we're on the subject of Ready Player One, I think you and I read an article about an interview. I believe Ernest Cline made the comments that said in a certain scene, and you know what, we're just going to break it down for you. And if you don't want to hear spoilers right now for Ready Player One, might just want to tune out for the next couple minutes on what we're going to be talking about. But in Ready Player One, the second key, which was different as far as the actual attempt to get the second key, it was different from the book, and what they had to do in the book to get the second key. In the film, they went through a stage that was created from a failed zombie game, or not a failed, but a zombie game in the setting of the 1980 movie The Shining. I know you've heard my comments, and I know you've read my review that's now available on popculturecosmos.wordpress.com that specifically stated how I didn't think the Shining scene was very good at all, and I thought it was a detriment, and the only time I didn't enjoy my time in the Oasis. Well, like I said, there was an interview that was conducted recently by Ernest Cline stating that the setting was originally supposed to take place in, get this, Josh, the setting in the world of Blade Runner, using the Mein Kampf machine and all that all the stuff that we have become familiar with and that we love so much about Blade Runner and its sequel, Blade Runner 2049. So I ask you, I was really irritated and angry when I read this and thought, man, they're just crazy not to go ahead and to have delved into that world for the second key adventure. Your thoughts on that? Would that have been a better choice, or am I just going crazy and thinking, what, they should have done that? Am I just? Do you think I'm nuts about preferring Blade Runner over The Shining as far as the second setting for the setting for the second key, or do you think that was probably the better way to go as far as Blade Runner over The Shining?
It pains me to say this, dude, but I get why they did it. The biggest complaint I hear about Blade Runner, I know, and not necessarily Blade Runner 2049 because I freaking love that movie. And they were saying the reason they didn't was because they didn't want that property being used in another thing while they were filming 2049. But I digress. Blade Runner, the biggest complaint I hear is even from people who love the second one, they're like they just couldn't get into the first one. Like it was just too confusing. And I get that. Like we're smart, me and you, we're smart dudes. So we know what's up with Blade Runner. We can cling on to that story pretty well. But as far as like reaching out to a wider audience, the Shining obviously like is you can have a little more fun with it. Whereas like, you had the comedy aspects of that part in Ready Player One with what's his name? Sorry, dogs are barking. Shoot, what's his name? The girl.
What,
H.
Artemis?
H. Yeah, you had the comedy parts with H.
Oh, yes, H. Okay.
Yeah, she was yeah, the parts where he's like flailing around and stuff. So
but the thing to me is with first of all, they couldn't get Jack Nicholson's likeness. That was a separate thing altogether, and they ultimately couldn't get that. So you can't get the most famous thing that even people who have never seen the movie, like you said on last week's episode, so many of your friends didn't see The Shining and have no idea of it, but they know here's Johnny when he pops through the door and his head pops and he goes, here's Johnny. They couldn't use his likeness in it. So really, to me, it was wasted material. The Shining is nothing without Jack Nicholson's character in it. So to me, that was just very disappointing. And for me, who loves Blade Runner, and if you check out my top 25 list on popculturecosmos.wordpress.com, you'll see how far up Blade Runner is on my top 25 all-time movies list. That just tells you how sad and how angry I am for them not choosing to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to see it. Of course, they made a lot of references in the book. They even had a part where they went to shoot, I'm having a brain fart. It's too early in the afternoon for this. What's the pyramid place in Blade Runner? What's it called?
Are you talking about the Industries of the guy that owns it?
Yeah. What's his name?
I forget him. Hold on.
But yeah, so okay. Are you on the old Wikipedias? Tyrell Corporation. Yeah, so they
Can't believe I forgot that too.
yeah, they go to the Tyrell Corporation, and they have that part, you know, the key is inside the question machine. And
The Mein Kampf machine.
yeah. Um yeah, that would have been cool to see come to life in some way, but you know, again, like I see why they didn't do it, and it's like, you know, I think they're trying to balance that line between making the movie for the nerds and making it for casual audiences, and they just kind of made a choice there.
But again, you were sitting in a room full of people that didn't know anything about The Shining, so they really couldn't relate to it. And so you even said that the Shining part was a bit off as far as having that scene in there. So I think they could have probably, attached themselves with Blade Runner a lot more, because Blade Runner 2049 is fresh and it just came out. I think people would have probably been able to associate the effort there a little bit better, and still found a good way for Artemis to win that key without having to go ahead and go down that road, because I found it a kind of disappointing part of the movie as far as overall. Now, mind you, I still rated the movie as far as with a positive reaction. You can check out again on my full thoughts in the movie, but I thought that second key part was a downer, and I thought a lot of it was because of The Shining. And even if you ask Stephen King has gone on the record since the movie had come out and said that he is not thrilled exactly with what was used as far as The Shining is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they took a lot of risks with that movie, and I think they just kind of, you know, again, they made the choice and hoped that it would pan out the way they were hoping it would. Uh, again, like all it really takes on a script is a couple little, little word changes and some sentences, and anything is most things can be uncomplicated pretty easily, including Blade Runner. So this was at the end. This was Ernie Klein, the guy who wrote the book, that made this decision. So I don't know, man. I would like to see it.
Well, I would have liked to have seen it as well. But remember, I said last week, I think Steven Spielberg has a lot of say as well, being one of the greatest directors of all time. But he's also a big time horror fan, and he tries to interject it in as many films as possible. And I believe that was one of the ways he decided that he could interject horror within the movie realm, was by adding The Shining. So, like I said, I'm not happy with it, but overall, the movie was still a positive experience for me. That first and third key experience was actually truly just very memorable to me and mesmerizing. And actually, I may see it again just because of those first and third key experiences. What are your thoughts on Ready Player One's decision to go away from the Blade Runner second key experience and go into using ultimately what they put on film, the Shining part of it? And then also as well, do you think John Cena? Well, actually, I wanted to ask you one last question. Let me just go on into this. I forgot to touch on this before we went into Ready Player One. Do you think long-term John Cena? Did I ask you about John Cena versus The Rock?
You made the comparison, but no, go on. What's your question?
Okay. Do you think John Cena eventually will be at that level where he can match box office power with The Rock? Because right now, Rock can even power even bad movies to a decent, everybody wants to talk about Baywatch. It failed, it was whatnot, but look at the overall numbers for it. It still was at a number where it could still had a decent opening, and only the power and the name of The Rock could do that. And Rock has also powered off more lukewarm, average films to box office relevance than pretty much any other person at this point in time right now. He reminds me a lot of Schwarzenegger and Stallone, how they could go and get bad movies or even mediocre movies and put them in a higher realm just because of their name. I think Rock is at that point, and certainly he's going to be tested upcoming with two movies that really aren't shaping up to be, Oscar winners in Rampage and Skyscrapers. So be that as it may, I mean, do you see Cena ever getting to that point where he can be at that level or even better as far as being able to be a box office name that can propel virtually any type of movie to relative box office success?
Here are my thoughts on that. People like John Cena. People like The Rock, but people don't like John Cena for the same reason people like The Rock. Even in wrestling, The Rock is he was a more serious character from a more serious time on that platform. Today, John Cena has had the unfortunate circumstance of coming up to fame at the time of the meme. So you have John Cena has kind of become the wrestling meme, or they show those little gifs or whatever, where dramatic things are happening. Also, John Cena, they have all those have been plastered the internet for a long time. So I think that John Cena he has the potential for momentum, but I don't think he's going to get the momentum The Rock has, at least not for the same reasons. If anything, we'll see John Cena maybe sticking more to comedies, whereas The Rock is more, he has a more diverse palette as far as what he's able to do. John Cena, maybe if he gets into some more serious roles, but we don't, was he the Marine? Was that him?
He did the Marine, and I think he did, was it 13 rounds or something like that? So he's 12 rounds, I think it was. He was
okay. So The Rock, The Rock he can play in a drama, he can play in a comedy. John Cena is what's working for him is that he's aware of himself, but I don't think that he's ever going to reach the level of fame that The Rock has unless he has the fortune of getting into a franchise, a franchise like Fast and the Furious, or what have you, something that kind of gets him into a movie with really high box office numbers. Until he gets there, I don't think he's going to be able to reach the level of fame that The Rock has.
I agree with you on that. I think that he's going to reach a level where he can pretty much be himself as far as comedies, be a comedic type actor, do a lot of voiceover work that will get him over to a certain extent, but being able to propel an action adventure film of the nature of what The Rock has done with San Andreas, obviously what he's done with Jumanji, and all the other big hits he's had over the recent years, and why he's the biggest actor at the box office right now. I don't think he'll ever get to that point, but I do see a successful run from John Cena as long as he makes sure and tries to get roles that he knows he can excel at. What are your thoughts on The Rock versus Cena as far as at the box office? Do you think the Cena can ever match up to The Rock as far as being a box office star? And also as well, on Ready Player One, were you happy with the second key scene, or did you think that Blade Runner would be a better option for achieving the second key goal in the movie than what was used as far as The Shining is concerned? Share us your thoughts, popculturecosmos@yahoo.com. Also as well, Pop Culture Cosmos, Humanica Media, and Game Source on Facebook and Twitter as well. Again, we're going to have a great episode. We have got Rob McCallum standing by in the Cosmic Crossfire. He's got some great pop culture talk coming up right after the break. And also as well, a little later on, we've got our good friend Mike Crockett from the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. He's going to stop by with a preview of WrestleMania and I'm assuming John Cena talk as well. But we'll also be breaking down our latest film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is Captain America: Civil War. And our indie games in trouble? We're going to be talking about that and a whole lot more. This is the PCC Multiverse. And we're back with the PCC Multiverse. This is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. Want to make sure and let you know our shows are being streamed 7 days a week on online radio, and that we deliver 2 brand new shows covering the latest in pop culture every Monday and Friday to Apple Podcasts or our over 30 different podcast networks. Just subscribe to any one of them on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel to get extra content, or just check out the Pop Culture Cosmos Facebook page for our entire radio schedule and a list of all those podcast networks, or at least the ones that we know about anyways. Josh, I know you got a great thing going on when it comes to Humanica Media. So share to the world out there what's going on with your great thing known as Humanica Media.
We have a new topic, Apocalypse. You should definitely check that out. It goes into a lot of things that are near and dear to our hearts, video games, mostly, and the political landscape they now find themselves in. There's also a new episode of Super BS going up. And I want to say soon there'll be new What About This, but I will let you guys know for sure when I find out. But you can check out our show on the Podcast Radio Network, 7 o'clock Tuesday.
That's right, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. You got it right, my man. You got it.
Yes, woot.
And indeed, that is the it is the Attack of the Mannequins, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on the Podcast Radio Network. And just as a note, just want to let you know out there, we apologize to anyone who tried to get the PCC Multiverse on some, not all. In fact, most of our channels on the podcast networks were okay, but some of our podcast networks like Apple Podcasts and podcast.com and a couple others were affected by I guess a bad file or something went wrong, or as far as the PCC Multiverse episode number 61 is concerned. As a bonus, not only have we replaced it again and put the PCC Multiverse in full for that, so you can check it out today on our podcast networks, but if you listen to this show and you download it, as a bonus, you will hear the PCC Multiverse from last week with our Ready Player One review, with our conversation with Jay Bartlett of Nintendo Quest on Solo, and Vince Attulo from that sports card show. He's also going to have an interview with, we're also going to talk to him as well. That's all coming up as bonus material if you go ahead and listen to this podcast, or you can find the full thing now on Apple Podcasts, podcast.com. Again, over 30 different podcast networks. Josh, I shared with you a recent article from someone that we interviewed at E3 of last year, someone who was looking really into what was going on with the indie scene. That was something that was near and dear as far as for him, as far as let me get that name going out. I had the article. Oh, there's. And it was for as Gone Home developer Jonman Nordhagen and his release of Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. He was so excited about it last year when we talked about it with him at E3 at the Indiecade, and I know he had a lot of high hopes for it, but he recently made some interviews and made the rounds as far as saying at this point in time, he has spent quite a bit of money, over $100,000 he has put out of his own pocket into the game as far as paying off, contractors and things of that nature, and has not made a dime yet on it. And he questions the long-term effectiveness of indie games in general. So I ask you this. I broached this subject with people on various podcasts as far as the Game Source Network some 8 years ago when we first started doing podcasts. And for a while, it didn't look very good for indie game developers at that point in time. But over the course of the next 5, 6, 7 years, it has really been something that they've been able to prosper at as far as indie games are concerned, not only on Steam and the PC, but also on the PlayStation and Xbox formats as well. And now I believe also as well the Nintendo Switch. So I ask you, are indie games in trouble, or is it just a case of that's something being singled out because maybe just it's not something that people are liking, and there's actually a robust format for indie game developers at this point in time?
All right, well, look at it this way. Steam is currently releasing 300 to 500 games per month. So that's about 10, I want to say 10 games per day. According to Polygon, last year there were 7,672 games released. So as an indie developer, this is a great time because the indie movement was born off of AAA titles not delivering what people want. It was born from the I don't want to say like the WB syndrome where the studio heads are too involved in the development of these things and it's not hitting what people actually want. But
I also think it also came out of the fact that a lot of mid-tier AA and single A developers that were full-fledged companies, I want to say like Midway, THQ, whatnot, also found hard times and actually folded in the mid 2000s, so that by the late 2000s and earlier this decade, there was a lot of room for people that were willing to start up with 5, 10, 15 people on an indie development budget.
Well, yeah, and also look at things like Visceral Games. Okay, they found great success with Dead Space. They were purchased by EA. EA shut them down. Same thing with was it IO Interactive that made Hitman.
But they branched out on their own.
Right. And so obviously they're not the outlier, but still you have these companies who get offered to be bought up by larger companies, and then they're like, oh cool, yeah, this is going to be a huge thing for us, and then it ends up biting them in the rear in the end. So and as for being an indie developer, they're like, they see this opening and they take it. And it's kind of the same thing with indie films going on right now. Indie films are a lot better than they ever have been before, and they're getting a lot more exposure. But with that also comes the possibility for oversaturation. So I think the Nintendo Switch releases like 8 titles a week, 8 new indie titles, or 18 or something like that. It's you got to ask yourself, like, you really do have to stand out in some way, or else you're just going to get buried beneath all the releases. And it's not so much that the game is bad, it's just that people won't notice it, and it's kind of how like the bigger titles all want to stay away from the release date of like the new Red Dead game, because anything that comes out within a 3-month span of that is just going to get buried by that game. So I think there needs to be a level of sorry, hold on, there's a plane going by.
That's weird because there's a plane going by overhead here too.
Whoa. This dude, this is our competing podcast. They're trying to mess with our audio here.
There you go.
No, but yeah, so it's just, how if you have a good game but you're coming out in the midst of like all these other games, what you need to really do something to make yourself stand out. And that's the problem that a lot of these games suffer from. And like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, I know the biggest complaint was that it was a great game, like from Polygon and IGN and stuff. They liked the game, but it just took so long to play. So I mean, there's a lot of factors, and this is really the beginning of this movement. I'm sure we'll see more as the months progress or whatever. But yeah, it's just there's just so many indie games coming out. It's becoming oversaturated with them.
And I know you're trying to reach out to Mr. Nordhagen as far as trying to get maybe a little bit more insight into that. But I will say this, he is one of the creators of Gone Home, which has been one of the biggest successes as far as indie games are concerned over the past 5 years. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that was a really popular one. I know people are still playing it.
Yeah, so you can't have, you're obviously going to be very blessed in the industry if you continue to have success after success after success. And this was something that when you and I both saw it at E3 was decidedly different than what we saw out of Gone Home. So again, it is like you said, with all the other releases that are out there, and everybody's into Fortnite and PUBG, and those weren't made by AAA studios themselves. So I'm sorry, I got to take that back because Fortnite was made by Epic, so I will take that back. I will cut that out. And there's so many, like you said, so many different titles that are out there as far as coming out each and every week. Small, medium, large titles that are coming out there, each with its own campaign on how they want to go ahead and market it and how they want to present it to consumers, and with reviews going up all over the place. Do people actually trusting those or not trusting those? Do people go by word of mouth? Or there's so many different ways to make a game successful, but there's also a lot of ways that a game can go awry as far as the success is concerned. And obviously that clearly is the case here with The Water Tastes Like Wine. And I'll tell you what, Josh, I think right now it is a great time to be an indie developer, and it is a great time to produce some indie games because there's so many different platforms that are willing to take in those games. And we saw it with the increase of 2-3 years ago with PlayStation really honing in on as far as indie developers and trying to make that a platform a success.
Yeah, and I like how Nintendo Switch is they're doing what they can to promote the indies, and then we have PlayStation literally put a whole bunch of money behind a game like No Man's Sky, even though it didn't really pan out for them, but they had helped create such a massive following for it that even when the game did bad, the fans were willing to put faith in it that the developers are going to fix it, and now it's like allegedly a really great game. So it's nice to see these big companies getting behind these games. And then you also have a game like Poncho. I know one of the guys from the Super BS just interviewed the developer of that game. That was one that was it had all these studios wanting to buy it, and but the guys, like, they wanted to stand behind their vision, and the game didn't end up selling as much as they hoped it would. But now that it's starting to garner word of mouth from people, it's slowly getting up to the point where it's going to start profiting soon, despite not being as successful as they hoped it would.
Well, that's some good news indeed. And you can check out Brian's interview with the developer of Poncho on the Super BS Gamescast. In fact, I may actually utilize that as well as one of the bonus material for one of next week's podcasts right here on the Pop Culture Cosmos. So that's some great things indeed. So Josh, your final thoughts on indie games. So it actually is a good time to be an indie game developer at this point in time. At least I think so anyways.
Yeah, no, I agree. And honestly, like, indie games are great because you get a lot of people as they get older, they don't have time to sit there and play these massive games, these 30-40 hour gaming experiences. So you can grab an indie game and you can play it in 6 hours and still feel like you got something accomplished. Like, that was a really great game. That was an interesting experience. So it's you're basically playing art, whereas a big AAA title is just a movie, playing art. So it's almost a completely different type of gaming, but it's cool to see how, I said it once, I said all the time that video games are such an interesting medium for storytelling, just to see the different ways that people do it. So I think that it's a great time, and I think that it'll continue to be great. Problem is marketing. Some of these devs are going to have to learn how to market their stuff better, so people at least know that, or can get them on the radar.
I think that's a great way to say it, and I think that's where a lot of it falls. Maybe not in the production of the game, but exactly how they market it to consumers. What are your thoughts on the indie development scene for video games? Do you think it's very plentiful? Do you think there's not enough support out there for indie game development? Share us your thoughts, popculturecosmos@yahoo.com. Also as well, Pop Culture Cosmos, Humanica Media, and Game Source on Facebook and Twitter as well. Josh, I know with Humanica Media, I hope you guys are going to be able to get a chance to connect again with Indiecade this year when you guys make the trip down to E3.
I hope so too. There's a lot of interesting games out there, and I remember playing a lot of them as they've been coming out. So it's definitely interested in checking it out.
Absolutely, and looking forward to all your coverage when E3 comes around in June. Coming up next, we've got our good friend Mike Crockett from the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. He's going to be previewing this weekend's WrestleMania. Who is going to come out on top in all the big matches? We're going to discuss that and break that down as only he can do. Check that out coming up right after the break. This is the PCC Multiverse. And we're back to close out the show. This is the PCC Multiverse. Thank you again for sticking around and tuning into the show and enjoying us the entire hour that we've been on the air. Want to thank Rob McCallum again from Rob McCallum Films. You got to check out his latest documentary, Kitty Origins and Evolutions. It has already hit all kinds of great numbers on Amazon.com. Actually sold out already its first batch. I know there's a lot more coming on the way, so check that out. Kitty Origins and Evolutions, and you can find out more information on that and all of his projects at robmccallumfilms.com. Plus, also as well, you got to check out as well our good friend Mike Crockett, who we cannot thank enough for showing up today, for being on today, previewing WrestleMania. You got to check out his great program along with his good friend, the Kingpin, Brian Malonis from Ring of Honor Wrestling. Together they make up the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing, and you can check out their show on Apple Podcasts as well. Josh, I want to ask you real quick before we head on out, as we break down the Marvel Cinematic Universe leading up to Infinity War later this month, in about 3 weeks, my friend, 3 weeks, as I'm counting it down. We're up to Captain America Civil War, and I know a lot of people are like all over the place. Some people, it's their favorite. With me, it's kind of not, and I know I've gone on the show repeatedly on why that's the case, but I want to hear your thoughts on Captain America Civil War one more time, and ask you, now that you've had some time to think about it, and now it's been, out of distribution as far as the film, and now it's in video. Probably next year will be coming to obviously a broadcast network as well. What are your thoughts on Captain America Civil War, and was it everything that you thought it should be?
It was sort of just a set piece for the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to me. Like, it was fun to watch. It was cool. Yeah. Brought in a bunch of characters, but it really just served as a reason for the drama in Infinity War, from what I understand. There's, I get it. There's a lot of properties that weren't available at the time that were in the original Civil War comic book. But, I mentioned this last week. I was hoping for more of a solo Captain America outing similar to Winter Soldier, and instead we just got another Avengers film. There are things that I liked. The introduction of the Black Panther was cool, and the callback to some of the characters from the comic books were cool. But like I said, it's a very busy movie, and there's a lot of things that like don't make sense. Like, they should have been fleshed out a little better. Like, we talked about this with Tony Stark's very rapid character transition, where he should have, they should have fleshed that out a little more, maybe over another movie or something. But and then Captain America, a lot of these characters, like they took a side and they didn't really explain why they were taking that side. So we didn't get to really go in depth with like why War Machine was fighting for them, or why Falcon was fighting on that.
Or Hawkeye. I know that's one everybody seems to point to as well.
Yeah, and Paul Rudd's thing was funny. He's the only character who kind of got an okay explanation, where he's just like, okay, whatever, and then he just kind of did it because it's either that or go to jail or something. So,
but he also did it because he wanted to follow Captain America, and he was such a fanboy over it. Right.
So we didn't really need a huge like in-depth explanation for him, but and the whole thing with Spider-Man, like, I think that Tom Holland had Captain America been the one to go to him, he would have chosen to fight for Captain America too. So that was that was interesting. I like seeing Spider-Man in it. I like the that fight scene was weird with him and Winter Soldier and the Falcon, but there's a lot of things that just could have been fleshed out better, and it was just a busy intersection of a movie.
And really, why the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they're supposed to have that non-bromance type deal, but they're also closely aligned to each other, but they also ended up really supposed to be not liking each other. But there's really not really one particular thing that makes them really hate each other. But again, It just they just started off, and you hear Falcon say the line, "I hate you," and it's just like, But then they've got this weird bromance thing going on as far as that's concerned for what two more picture, one more picture after that.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see a little bit of that carry on into Infinity War, but they didn't really. There wasn't a lot of comedy, and Marvel needs that comedy, so they kind of just took it wherever they could put it, and that was how that resulted.
And the last thing I want to say in regards to Captain America Civil War, and I've said this before, and actually you can read my thoughts on the breakdown I make for the Marvel Cinematic Universe on our Pop Culture Cosmos sites. I'll just say this, man. The first two parts were pretty good. It's that third part that's a big letdown with Baron Zemo's character, and probably one of the worst turns by a Marvel villain that there is. Daniel Bruhl's a great actor. I just loved him in The Alienist that just was played.
Rush.
And you got it.
So good.
What?
In Rush with Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Daniel Bruhl's a great actor, but he wasn't given enough to do. And the fact that they had an opportunity to have them go up against, it would have been another villain of the movie type deal situation if he had risen up the other the other Winter Soldier type personalities that were still there, the Russian soldiers that were encased in the cryo chambers. If he would have risen them and made them like in the comics, the masters of evil, it would have been an actual, for me, probably a better way to finish the movie as far as them going against the film. But then again, it was, the title's called Civil War, but I really thought that was a poor way to go out and a poor way to utilize Daniel Bruhl as a villainous character.
Right. And there's also the thing, like releasing those guys wouldn't have given them the end result that they wanted, though, because they wanted them to be fighting each other. But if they release those guys, they'd all be teaming up, Avengers style, and they'd be really like stoked to be on the same team with each other. So I don't know, like it could have gone either way. I don't think they needed the whole thing with Bucky killing Tony's parents. Like, I just think that was a bunch of crap. Like, that was just, we need a storyline, so let's put that in there. We'll see what happens. So I'm curious to see what happens when they all come together again.
Yeah, I agree with you that it was just a throw in there. Let's make Bucky the killer. So you always have that tension between him and Tony Stark. And the fact that the Winter Soldier is truly a troubled character because he is cognizant of all those bad things that he's done, even though he had no control over it. But I still would have liked to see at least the point or something inferring that maybe the Masters of Evil was going to be something that they could utilize, maybe not even Civil War, but in another future film. I just thought that was a cop-out, or even a not understanding why that they put those parts in there with the development of these soldiers, these super soldiers type deal, if you're just going to go ahead and just put bullet holes in them at the very end. It just seemed like a cop out and a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the first time they've done that, though, with the Mandarin. Remember, that was just a total waste of a villain by not making him the actual Mandarin.
Exactly. But again, Marvel still hasn't perfected its villains per se, with a lot of them over the course of the cinematic universe. We've talked about that the villains have been really a hard thing for them to do and translate from the comic books to the film. And Captain America Civil War, to us, is no different. What are your thoughts on Captain America Civil War? Do you think it was everything that it should have been? Share us your thoughts, popculturecosmos@yahoo.com. Also as well, Pop Culture Cosmos, Team Annika Media, and Game Source on Facebook and Twitter as well. Any last thoughts, Josh, on the way out?
Sorry, dogs are barking. No, I think I'm good right now. I can still hear the dogs. What's up?
I can still hear the dogs.
Okay, well,
couldn't hear the plane, but I can hear the dogs.
Yeah, well, I don't have anything. I don't know when they're going to stop barking, so we're good.
Fair enough. Actually, any last thoughts on going on the way out? But I know that's something entirely different there. But all right, so I guess we'll just end it with this. So for Josh Peterson, this is Gerald Glassford. It's another beautiful day. It's another beautiful day right here in the PCC Multiverse. We thank you for listening. And here's hoping you have yourself a great day.